So, welcome everyone to the weekly podcast here at SimNation around the different football leagues that we have. I apologize for you seeing things other than what's going on. Just making sure that I grab a couple of things here real quick. There we go. So, we have just completed the season. Hopefully, you can see the screen okay. I'm trying a couple different things. Um, but wanted to talk first about SNCFL. Of course, SNCFL is the Draft Day Sports College Football 2021 title that we play here at SimNation. It is the only collegiate league here at SimNation from a Draft Day Sports perspective. And of course, Draft Day Sports is a Wolverine Studios title. Kind of today want to do a quick around the league, talk a little bit about recruiting, talk about looking forward, and then give a couple shout outs to different coaches as well as the WWPF. So with that, we'll just dive straight in because we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So since the last time we talked, the conference championships have happened. And generally speaking, most of them went the way we thought they would. There were a couple of upsets. There were a couple interesting storylines that developed. In the ACC, no shock, Clemson just completely obliterated Virginia. I think it was like 42-3 or something like that to win the ACC. Kind of an upset in the American Athletic Conference. Memphis upset Central Florida, which will have a direct impact on the playoffs. So Caesar, great job. I mean, we'll talk a little bit later about Memphis in general, but that's a pretty big upset. No shock in the Big 12. Skeletor and Baylor got past Texas Christian. It was probably a little closer than he would have liked, but in the end, it doesn't matter. Win's a win. So congrats at Baylor. Maryland easily got by Purdue. No one really thought this one would be a game. Purdue is barely at 500. I think they're under 500 now. And Maryland just completely destroyed them. Kind of a little bit of an upset, but not really. Washington State downed Arizona. We'll talk a little bit about that situation in a moment. But Washington State took the Pac-12. Alabama in the Iron Bowl lost to Auburn. Not a shock. Matt has Max's number generally most seasons, and it's a moral victory because, of course, Auburn had a couple upset losses and weren't able to make the playoffs. But as a result of that, instead of being like a 1 or 2 seed, Alabama ends up being a 3 seed in the playoffs. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But they got by Tennessee. Again, another close game, a lot closer than thought. I think it was like the difference was like 3 points. Little bit of a shocker, not really. Texas State upset Louisiana Monroe in the Sun Belt Conference. And of course, what that means for Texas State is that they made the playoffs. What it means for Louisiana Monroe is they'll end up in a second-tier bowl. Colorado State, kind of an upset, beat UNLV. UNLV's had a great season despite the roster situation that developed there. But in the end, they just couldn't get by Colorado State, and Colorado State takes the Mountain West. Louisiana Tech, no shock, got by Marshall. That one, the only thing that was a little bit of shock there was it was a 7-point win. So Louisiana Tech takes Conference USA. And then, of course, in the MAC, no shock again. Northern Illinois wins the MAC by downing Akron. Again, a little bit of shock because the game was closer than thought. So, because of the Memphis win at Central Florida, it completely threw the ratings out of whack. So again, in this league, it's the top 8 teams by rating make the playoffs. So in the playoffs is Maryland, who grabs the number 1 seed, Clemson, who grabs the number 2 seed. If I'm not mistaken, both those teams are undefeated. Alabama, because they lost to Auburn in week 15, drops to the 3 seed. Texas State, with an undefeated season, grabs the 4 seed. It'd be really interesting to see in real life if they would actually let Texas State into the playoffs, but we'll leave that alone. Skelto grabs the 5 seed at Baylor. 6 seed is James at Texas A&M. 7 seed and 8 seed are both Computer. Little bit of a controversy with both of these. Well, with the 7 seed, not the 8 seed. Truly believe Louisville deserves to be in. I think they only had 1 loss on the season. I'll have to check that. I could be wrong. But California is a little controversial. They weren't the Pac-12 champion. Yes, they only have 1 loss, but the 1 loss was to Washington State. Washington State's only 2 losses was to the ACC Coastal champion in Virginia, and to Texas A&M, who's the 6th seed. So Washington State finishes 10th. They don't make the playoffs. I kind of thought Central Florida should have made the playoffs because really, while losing to Memphis is an upset, it isn't losing to a bad team. It's actually a good team. So a little bit of the logic probably needs to look at. I actually would have preferred to see Auburn jump up into that 8th seed, give Louisville the 7th seed. So what that really means from a playoff perspective is this. Maryland will play Louisville, and that's the 1 versus the 8. The 2 versus the 7 will be Clemson versus California. And then when you get into it next is the 3 will be a rematch of a game earlier in the season, which is why Texas A&M didn't make it to the conference championship game. The only loss was to Alabama. Alabama and Texas A&M will meet again in the playoffs. And then you have Baylor versus Texas State. This will be an interesting game. Texas State, of course, has Louisiana Monroe's number. They have had it pretty consistently for years, but that was different when I was coaching them. In Skelter and I have a whole back and forth thing going about who wins and who doesn't. I'm not at Texas State anymore. They're on CPU. They will play Baylor. Baylor is arguably the best of the Skelter teams. Yeah, he'll say they're having an off season and stuff, but I don't expect this one to be close. I expect Baylor just to put away Texas State. Maryland should get by Louisville relatively easy, and I believe that they then would play Baylor. Got to be careful with Maryland in the first round, though. They have lost in the first round before when everyone thought they were going to win. It was a few seasons back, and they just utterly dropped the ball and got beat by a CPU team. It feels strange because I'm talking about myself in that regard. California versus Clemson. This ain't going to be close. Clemson's just going to whoop them. So I don't expect to see that. I'm kind of a Cal fan, but I hate Clemson, and I hate them with a passion. But, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a Matt coach team. I like Matt as a coach. He's a great coach. He's won championships. He's going to get by California. Texas A&M versus Alabama. This is actually going to be a really good game, and I'm not going to call it because on one hand you have James, on the other hand you have Max. Both are really good coaches. James has done nothing wrong with that Texas A&M roster since he took over midseason for them. He has absolutely been killing it. So I think he'll do fine. I really think that it'll be a really good game, and whoever wins, the winner will get Matt and Clemson, and that'll be another good game. So playoffs isn't going to be clear. I'm not going to predict anything. I want to see how the first round goes. But generally, I think it'll be Maryland versus Baylor in the second round, and then it'll be Clemson versus whoever wins Texas A&M and Alabama. It's too close for me to call. So if we look across the bowl scene, let me bring that up, I think. So we just completed bowls. The way this works is you have your conference championships and you have bowl games, then you have the playoffs, and it'll be the first round, the second round championship game. Um, so, of course, that's the playoff scene. With the bowls, I'm going to try not to go too much into things because some people may not have looked yet, but I'm going to go anyways. In the Holiday Bowl, uh, just Purdue just keeps upsetting people. This week they got Arizona State. Arizona State's, of course, coached by Gary. They've had a great season at Arizona State. Takes nothing away from Gary, but I believe they lost like 41-31. I could look, but I'm not going to. So Purdue gets by them to win the Holiday Bowl. In the Citrus Bowl, Tennessee's had a great year as well. Uh, they won a close one against Ohio State. Ohio State, of course, is coached by Rick. And then Mizzou or Missouri got by Michigan. Michigan's up and coming. They have a great coach. And I think that had he had more time and been there last year into this year, I think Michigan would be a different story. And I'm really excited to see where Michigan goes next year. But this year, Missouri was just too much. Missouri's a good team. So is Michigan. But Michigan falls in overtime, 35-32. If I remember correctly, I think the way that worked out is Michigan kicked a field goal. Missouri scored a touchdown. So that's how that one ended up. Auburn made pretty quick work of Florida State in the Music City Bowl. No shock though. That's Matt versus CPU. And Auburn and Florida State hate each other anyway, so good job though. Louisiana Monroe channeled all their anger about recruiting and all their anger about the situation in the Sun Belt this season, and they just absolutely demolished Northern Illinois. It's like 52-5 or something like that. So, of course, they win the Dollar General Bowl, and Skelter won't be happy about that, but it will at least make some of that pain go away. Central Florida, no shock, gets by Louisiana Lafayette, so they bounced back from the upset at the hands of Memphis pretty decently by downing one of Max's teams. Another upset for Memphis, they beat Miami in the Military Bowl. So Memphis just keeps going, and they're doing a great job there. So I think they won by like a point. So that's a great job there again, Cecil. Van, great season at NC State, but South Carolina is a little bit too much for them. South Carolina wins the Belk Bowl. Is Belk even still in business? I'll leave that alone. I think that they are actually. So South Carolina wins that one. Washington State versus Tulsa. I'm trying to keep my opinion back in the fact that they end up at the Cactus Bowl. But they win the Cactus Bowl, and this one was an interesting one because it's one of the nation's leading rushing attacks versus one of the nation's leading passing attacks. Jesus Metz versus Thomas Shen. Thomas Shen is the running back from Washington State. Jesus Metz is the quarterback from Tulsa. Thomas Shen wins it. Then in the Liberty Bowl, what we have is SOA, Florida versus West Virginia. This is actually a pretty good game, right? Florida wins this one by like 5 points, downing West Virginia. Great job, SOA, with turning around the Gators. It should be great to watch what happens next year. And then in the Camilla Bowl, Georgia State, who's another one of Rick's team, falls to Bowling Green. It's not too much of a shock. Bowling Green's a really good team. And then they'll trying to see if there's any other games of note. I'm not really going to use the corporate sponsor names because I hate that. I just wish I would go back to the original bowl names, but I'll leave that alone. So as we look across a couple of things, so we'll look here real quick. and we'll go to, we'll just go to news. It's the easiest way I see it. So, again, I'm not going to harp on this. I've said this in the last 3 or 4 podcasts. I really don't like how awards are being given, and I really don't like the fact that there's nothing for running backs. I'm going to argue that whoever wins the Heisman this year is going to be a quarterback, and whoever wins the Heisman this year as a quarterback doesn't deserve it over a different person. And I'll mention that in a moment. So, if you look across Hill, Atlantic Coast, Calvin Weno had a good season. He's not the best player on the Atlantic Coast. The best player is actually one of Clemson's running backs, and we'll talk about him in a moment. I'm not going to argue Jesus Metz. I agree with that one. In the Big 12, I'm going to argue Robert Sullivan did not have a better season than either of the 2 Baylor running backs, the Texas A&M quarterback. List goes on, right? But this isn't something new. This has actually been in this game for a while. It's one of those things I hope they fix, because I think going back to the beginning, this has always been the case where whoever wins Conference Player of the Year is not the best player on the conference normally. There are cases where they are. I'll argue that Mike Gunther is not the best player there. So, and then if you look through the other ones like Conference USA, not sure Freddie Wilcox either. So I'm just going to move on before I get mad. So Matthew Bennell is another person who I think had a great season. I have no problems with him being the All-American quarterback. Definitely agree. Definitely a Heisman candidate. Julius Bryant is not the top running back in the nation. And in fact, if we scroll all the way down, the best running back in the nation is this guy right here, running back Daniel Dickinson from Clemson. In real life, if a running back scores 19 touchdowns, they're going to win the Heisman, or at least be in it. I don't know that they would actually win it, though, and I'm going to be careful with that because I think Matthew Bennell would win it. Because his season, he threw 49 touchdowns. I don't think anybody had that. So it'd be between Matthew Bennell and him. Generally, I'm not going to disagree with the rest. I'll just leave that alone before I start spinning myself up. Aaron Daniels had a great season at Louisiana Monroe. You also have the... I don't talk a lot about defense, so if you want me to talk about defense, let me know. Not a defense guy, I like offense, so I may not always talk about him. Todd Saunders had a great year at Auburn. And then you have Thomas Shin, I mentioned him earlier. Great season out of him at Washington State. He's probably one of the reasons why Washington State had such a great year, if not the main reason. And then again, we got Julius Bryant Hill, Boise State. He's not even the best player on his conference. It's Thomas Smith. So when we look at the awards race, right now the way it stacks is I don't believe that the best player is necessarily going to win. Now, I could be wrong because Matthew Bennell may win it, and I would argue that he probably deserves it because he's had a phenomenal year at quarterback. I think, though, you do have to look at Dickinson. You have to look at the different running backs. We'll look at that real quick before I get into recruiting because I want to make sure I talk about recruiting because that's a hot button topic. So you look at Bennell, over 5,000 yards. Thomas Smith is right up there. You get passing touchdowns. Jesus Metz had 50. Matthew Bennell had 49. So really it's these two. And if Jesus Metz had quite a few yards as well. I think he's like third. Yeah, 4,900 yards. Passing rating. Always got to remember to do that. Again, you see the same names. Thomas Smith, Matthew Bennell both had really good passing ratings. Kind of makes sense. When we look at rushing yards, the league's top rusher was Aaron Daniels. Pretty good, almost 2,000 yards in this new version. Rushing yards are way down because last year, I mean, we had like, I forget how many, but we probably had like 5 or 6 over 2,000 yard rushing backs. And one guy who was bordering 3,000. The previous year, I think we actually had a 3,000 yard running back. Aaron Daniels, great season. Santiago Worthy out of Maryland had a pretty good season, but nowhere near like Aaron Daniels. Anthony Nance, great season as well, and Todd Sanders. And then you have the two Washington State. Kerry Blunt is there. We talked about him at the beginning of the year. Probably not as good a season as maybe was hoping, but again, Skelter, like me at Maryland and at Washington State, runs a backfield by committee. Now, truthfully, the game forces that. So if you're blowing people out, you're going to see the running backs change, whether you want them to or not. Again, mentioned Daniel Dickinson. I think really Doak Walker's between Dickinson and Nance. Blunt could sneak into that conversation, but it's one of those two. Receiving yards, no shock there. Boise State. You have both of the Tennessee wide receivers there. Well, when we look at the touchdowns, the Tennessee guy, Keith Noble, stands out. Probably should be the Blitnikoff winner. Although Gary might argue that Ben Early is definitely up there as well. I'm not going to talk about kickers. When we look at tackles, nobody broke 100 this year. It's a little shock. You always have someone over 100, but again, it is what it is. Chad Culpepper is someone to keep an eye on, but when you look at the UNLV Rebels, they had David Gagne. Both our free safeties had almost 100 tackles. And again, part of that is because of the roster situation at UNLV. Sacks-wise, no shock here. Andre Parker dominated pretty much throughout the season. In a perfect world, I think he actually wins the Bednarik Award, which is given to the best defensive player. Definitely he wins, I think it's the Outland, which goes to the best defensive lineman. Interception-wise, a whole bunch of people were six, spread pretty evenly. I think I'd have to go back and look and see who scored the most touchdowns. But generally speaking, if we look and see who are they predicting. Let's see here. Okay, so Heisman, it's going to be hard to argue against Matthew Bennell. More and more I think about it, he had a great season. Metz is up there. I do think Dickinson should be in the conversation, or Nance, or Blunt from Baylor. Same thing with most outstanding offensive player. I think it's the same situation. I dropped Thomas Smith off that list, but I think you have four there. Defensive player, I really think it's Andre Parker should win that. Most outstanding running back, again, we kind of talked about this a little bit already. I'm not going to beat it dead. Only probably one of those guys deserves to be on the list. Although Aaron Daniels, he almost rushed for 2,000 yards, so probably should be in the conversation as well. The Davey O'Brien, I think Ben or Metz is definitely between those two. Same thing. Now, outstanding senior quarterback, if I remember correctly, Metz has some really good stats. So look for him to be in the WWPF. I think some of the other people you see, they may not. Ricketts may, but I think talent-wise, he may not be as high. Wide receiver-wise, definitely Blevins is someone to keep an eye on, so is Madden. I'm not going to talk about the Mackey, but if you look at this, I think it's pretty clear that it should go to the kid from Tulsa and Claude Hamilton. For the offensive lineman, I believe this is a Lombardi Award. It probably goes to Leo Ferrero out of Tennessee. He just had a great year with pancakes. And then again, we already talked about defensive linemen. Linebacker-wise, these stats seem pretty low. I'd have to look and do a deeper dive to see who should be, so I'm not going to touch that. I'll probably cover that in the next podcast because we'll know who won by that point. Thorpe Award winner, that goes to the best defensive back. Normally, I like to see someone who scored a lot of touchdowns and a lot of interceptions. I think Houston Smith will win it. Um, and then, of course, you have the Luke Rosa, which goes to the best kicker. Um, I really think it's probably Malcolm Schroeder. I mean, dude's 41 of 50. That's pretty amazing. Now, unless he's kicking them all within like the 30-yard line. Most outstanding punter, that's the right guy. Uh, Probably would go with Kenneth Turner out of Western Michigan. So that kind of gets us to what's happened around the league. Now, looking forward. So before I go into recruiting, I want to touch on WWPF and looking forward. So looking forward, by the next time we do a podcast, we should be done with the playoffs, which means we will have crowned a champion. We will be at the end of the season, which means that the Senior Bowl will have been played, the awards will be generated. Um, I'm not going to try to predict who's going to win the championship. Every time I do that, I'm wrong. I do think Maryland's going to get knocked out of it. I don't think that they're going to win the championship this year. My money is on likely Clemson or whoever wins the Baylor Texas State matchup. Now, of course, if it's Texas State, I don't think Maryland loses to Texas State. If it's Baylor, I think Maryland loses to Baylor. I think Clemson beats Baylor in the championship. So I'll make a prediction. Matt will hate me because I probably just jinxed them. So from a WWPF, of course, this league feeds the WWPF. WWPF is Draft Day Sports Pro Football. They just completed their season. And as much as I hate it, because I'm the coach of Pittsburgh, though, Peter won the WWPF with the Oakland Raiders. The dude's a juggernaut. Every year he's in the playoffs. Every year he's competing for the Super Bowl. I forget how many rings he has now. I'm sure he'll tell me at some point. But great job, Peter. If I remember correctly, he downed the Redskins. It wasn't very close, but it's a pretty good job. There are a lot of coaches that are in this league, that are in that league. If I remember correctly, both Gary and Skelter won the playoffs as well as a couple others. I didn't make it, but Pittsburgh didn't have a good year. So, like I said before, it'll be interesting to see who comes out. I'll cover that because when I go to flip the season, it will actually tell me who is coming out early and who is graduating. Player-wise, going into the season, I think I can see that. Maybe not. Yeah, I think I can see that hill. Go hill. So coming into the season, from a senior perspective, we'll just look at quarterbacks. Eugene Wade is someone who I expect to be, though. You may see George Vault come out. UNLV wise, again, they just had some issues this year, but there should be a couple UNLV quarterbacks in there as well. I think Casey Smets, if I remember correctly, is a senior. He should be another person. I expect Blunt to come out. And then, of course, Libby. He may not have had a good year this year. I don't think he even cracked it. But he should be in that conversation. And then you've got a couple others who may come out that could change it. I think Santiago Worthy out of Maryland's another person. And, of course, he's a senior, if I remember correctly. Line-wise, there's some good line people. Joseph Ralph is a good line person. So is Rocky Griswold. Same with William Bryce. So in the WWPF, I think this may be a good year to get a lineman because there are quite a few ones. I don't remember if tackle's very deep, though. But some of these people, again, are people who should come out. Like Fletcher's a good lineman. So is Daly. So, And then you got center wise, who really cares about centers, but you got a couple in there who will probably crack into the conversation. At wide receiver, you've got some burners that should come out. I think Post will come out, but I don't think he'll do well in the ratings that WWPF does. He doesn't have the production, mostly just because Maryland doesn't throw the ball. But you'll have a couple of the different ones. One of the Tennessee guys is coming out. At cornerback, which is a skill position, again, you've got a couple really good people who will be coming out. You got Eric Wallace, Antonio Edwards. But again, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. But generally speaking, this should be a pretty talent-laden class coming out this season. And of course, the two classes will be synced this season. Generally, SNCFL has been ahead of WWPF. So this will be the first time where the seasons will be synced, and who they draft this year will be who played this year. So I would highly encourage you, if you like pro football simulations, go look up WWPF. It's wwpf.us. Gary's one of the commissions, so is Skelter, and then there's a third one named Frankie. Great crew, great dynamic in the league. They have their own Slack channel. Kind of wish they would start doing a podcast, but I mean, it's a great league to be a part of and a great league to be around. So, now talking about recruiting, because we got to talk about it, right? Some changes were made in this version. The changes for some coaches were catastrophic. For other coaches, they weren't. Some coaches went immediately onto auto recruit as soon as the season started. They've generally done pretty well. Some coaches really started to test and tease it out, and maybe not as well as they did in the past, but did decently. Some did actually better than they've done in the past. And then there's some who tried the same tried and true methodology that they've always done, and they sucked. So I'm not going to take a side here, right? I am going to say there is something fundamentally wrong with recruiting. And I think it's easily fixed. And I think Bandit and the guys at Wolverine Studios know what it is, and I think they'll fix it. They've always been good about that. But I think what happened is, if you tried to recruit at the beginning of the season through week 8, doing the same way you had done in the 2020 version, 2019 version, the 2018 version, you didn't get any recruits, more than likely. And if you didn't get in, you flipped over to the CPU, you were utterly screwed. And we've had that happen with one of the teams, actually two of the teams. One of the teams recovered, the other one did not. So in the team, of course, I'm talking about is Louisiana Monroe. For those of you who don't know, Louisiana Monroe is in the Sun Belt, but they are a 77 prestige team. They're not a low team. They've actually been out recruited by two of the other teams in the Sun Belt, in Louisiana Lafayette and Texas State. Texas State is around a 50 or maybe a 60 actually prestige. Louisiana Lafayette is within 3. So Sunbelt maybe not as good as last season. Last season they were pulling 5 stars. In fact, the Texas State quarterback this year is a 5-star. I think the same happened. There was another 5-star too that went somewhere there. So Louisiana Monroe, Louisiana Lafayette, Texas State were recruiting 5 stars last season. Now, is that real life? No. Is that possible in real life? Not really. But I think you also have to bear in mind that the Sun Belt in this league is actually made up of pretty good teams. I would argue in some regards that they are better, those teams, than some of the other teams in the Power 5 conferences. And I won't get into the real life debate about Power 5 versus non-Power 5 and stuff like that. But whether it's they're getting penalized for conference prestige, and I'm not seeing that. and I'm looking pretty hard. Now, are they pouring the same 5 stars and other things? And Bandits made a couple comments here or there. No, they're not, but they could. And there is a precedence. There are Mountain West Conference teams pulling them. There's Conference USA teams pulling 5 stars. So it is possible. And in the simulations I'm doing offline, I've actually had one season where I took back Texas State in a sandbox and I got 3 5 stars. It is possible, but you got to work your ass off. And this kind of gets into what I think is fundamentally a couple of the problems with recruiting. One, interest is hard to determine. In the past, it was relatively straightforward. It was relatively easy. And I'm going to use Maryland as an example. So I'm logged in as the commish. I'm not going to go in any other one's team other than my own. So when you look at Maryland, of course, is a 90 prestige. They are one of the top teams in the entire SNCFL, right? Actually, it won't let me. I don't think I'm giving away anything. I can change that. And don't get on me about my passcode. So if you look at recruiting and you bring it up, Maryland hasn't had a bad season. Not as good as they normally are, but let's face it, Alabama kicked everyone's ass this season. And Max has started to do that. He's really on a good recruiting kick. And if you also look at it, I don't have much to work with. I have depth, except for at tight end. Running back in a little short there, but again, I still have 4. So I routinely make sure I have a lot of depth. It's just something I do. I like running 3 deeps, 4 deeps. So I didn't have many scholarships to begin with, still substantial, and I got a lot of commits, including 5 stars. And in the places where I needed them the most, I did get them. So you're not going to be able to see what I did previously. But I am going to show you a couple things that I'm seeing. That is, if I can, go to actions. Let's see here. We'll look at uncommitted. So this is the way the screen looks now. I'm going to start by saying fundamentally I like the recruiting module. I think the changes they made, I really like. It really speaks to a lot of different things that I just enjoy about these type of games in general. Some of the things I think that need to be changed is I have no problem with recruiting points. I have no problem with scouting points. Those are based on your budget. Those are based on formulas, based on your prestige and so forth. I have no problems with either of those 2 things. I do have a big problem with outreach points. Outreach points are too low. Bandits already acknowledged that. I'm not going to beat that one dead. To me, they need to be doubled or they need to be tripled. And really the formula that I think it should be is you're given a certain amount of phone calls per week. And I forget what the NCAA guidelines are. But home visits, you're not doing home visits like 18 of them a week, right? You're probably able to do maybe 4, maybe 2. It could be 2, right? But the way it is right now, if you look at that, a home visit, if I remember correctly, is 5. I can do 3 at Maryland, and I do nothing else. Invite to a game. Normally, at most games, you're able to invite. I mean, you look at Alabama. There's some games where they have like 16 kids that show up to the game, right? So I think you need to think about that. And one of the things I would say that may be a good thing to think about, I just don't know that you can program this, right, is home visits. A lot of times home visits are not happening during the regular season while you're playing games. When a coach goes on home with someone, they're typically doing it on the bye weeks. And maybe that's the thing that you put in there, right? Or you have something where you do a home visit or something when you're at home, playing at home. Attend a high school game. Again, here, if you look at that, I can only do 4 a week. That's, again, it should be more. I would almost say that for a team of Maryland's caliber who 90 prestige, right? Don't have an issue with making this by prestige. And of course, I would say that because I have a high prestige. Um, but I think that you should increase this by not double, but at least times three. If this number is 48, I can work that, especially in the beginning of the season. I can say, okay, I want these guys to get phone calls, I want to do facility tours and stuff, but at least double it. And I think they're going to do that. But here's where the other issue is. If you notice, I don't have a scholarship. I'm going to have to choose a different team. Hold on a second. Let's choose the one that has more issues. We'll go here. Hopefully I still have a scholarship at UTSA. I've been aggressively fixing my recruiting challenges here now that I better understand it. Come on. Okay, so this is UTSA. Don't judge me. It's not been kind because I tried to do some things at UTSA that I didn't do at Maryland. Maryland has a high prestige, so I was able to recover faster. UTSA has a very low prestige. I'm not going to recover fast. They're not on CPU anymore, so what happened with them is up until week 14. So for the first 8-9 weeks, I ran, maybe 10, I ran the recruiting, and you can see it, I missed 77 times, right? Just horrible recruiting. I flipped it over to CPU. It got worse. And in fact, the CPU who they were going after was people I would never even entertain. I'd rather have no scholarships, give out no scholarships, and go after these people. But at the end of the day, I did that for a few weeks. Around week 14 or week 15, I flipped them back over to human controlled. I changed the way I approached recruiting, and I signed like a lot that week. Now, in Skelter's case at Louisiana Monroe, he's still only got one scholarship player. And this is a fairly high prestige team. Now, he made some mistakes. He tried to recruit the same way he had always done, which is in the old games, you looked on this screen and you saw, let's go to uncommitted. You look here and you see who's been offered. Well, this guy's got no offers. I'm going to go after him. And then you click on scholarship offer. You maybe pump a couple points into this guy. Skelter would never go after a 1300 player, by the way. But then you click here. Now, herein lies the problem with interest. It's here. Now, if I click on, let's say, Freddie Coe, I can't tell anything. So in the past, I was able to offer a scholarship, click on the link for the person, and this bar would actually either be short or long, red or green. If they didn't kill, I offer them a scholarship and they stay at a 1, or that bar's low, I get off of them. I'm done. I'm not talking to you because there's no way I'm going to convince you to come to my school. Now, with low prestige teams, I'd stay on because if someone didn't go after, say, a 5, 6, 700 prospect, there was a chance at interest of 15 to 20 to 30 that I could steal them. Because if I stayed on and they killed about loyalty under talking points, I could actually get that person. That doesn't happen anymore. It's not going to happen because one of the things is the CPU now goes after people who have 0 recruits. They stay on them. And as a result, you're not pulling that person. You're not getting build up like you used to. And that's a major change for some of the coaches. So like for Skelter, his past recruiting practice was look, see who has 0 scholarship offers, go after that person. Stay on them. The problem you have now is within the first 2 weeks, the CPU is on everybody. And they don't back off. Because in the past, what would happen is the algorithm was such that If they saw a bigger name team, they saw whatever, they backed off, and you had them. You don't got that anymore. So if you were using that as your recruiting pitch and you stayed on through week 13 or 14, whenever those guys signed, you're screwed. They're not going to sign with you. They're going to go to the other people. Now, there are other cases where, you know, you have a guy like in Arizona. I had this happen at Maryland. A guy literally in, I think, Maryland signed with Utah over Maryland. Maryland, the reigning champion, the highest prestige team, literally in the backyard. And when I say backyard, I'm talking like 15 miles away, right? And they killed about location. They went to Utah over Maryland. The same thing happened at Arizona State, where they went to Baylor over Arizona State. Now, the reality is, I think the difference may have been negligible. So you have some of those things, but let's be honest, that's always going to happen, right? And it happens in real life. I'll use a guy as an example. There was a kid out of, by the way, Woodson High School, DC, a couple years ago, just had this phenomenal class of kids, right? They had this running back, I forget what his name is, but he kind of played around with Maryland, decided to go to USC. Then suddenly something happened, and then he was playing around with Maryland again. And I forget, he went somewhere else, but then he ended up at Pitt over Maryland. No one would have guessed it. Everyone thought he was going to come to Maryland ultimately, but he didn't. He went off to Pitt, and of course now he's not at Pitt. He's somewhere else. So you're going to have those. And while I will use it as an example, it's one out of like maybe 70 of those, right? But I think the bigger problem here is there needs to be a way for you to quickly offer somebody, either see it here on this screen where interest populates, and don't even make it the full interest. You could say 15, 30, 40, 50, whatever. Because what it tells me is there's some interest. I could go after that guy. If I offer a quarterback and I have 5 of them and he shows as a 1, not going to go after that dude. He doesn't like me. He doesn't want to come to school, and I'm fine with that. I don't want him either. But so one thing would be the quick interest. The second thing, we talked about outreach, not going to go there anymore. By the way, if the key to outreach is you got to ramp it. So if you play bowl bound, you're used to this, right? The best recruiters are always the people who 1 week I'm offering, I'm nailing I may offer and go talking points if I can guess it quickly. But I may not offer you a visit until the second week, because in the third week you may commit. And if you're going to commit, I want to try to get the visit right before the commit, because I'm stacking those points on top of each other. And I think that there's something similar here, right? So get your phone call in first, then go for a home visit, then invite them to the game, or vice versa, right? Attend our game, then invite them to a game, then do a home visit when you think they're going to commit, and then keep playing with those point totals. That's how you ramp. And I think that's how you'll be successful in recruiting. The other thing is you got to really look at who's on those targets, and you got to look at what you offer. I like to think sometimes that some of the changes in the recruiting has to do with Maryland. Bandit plays in this league. And there was a period of time where I was stockpiling recruits. Hey, look, I have 15 scholarships available. I'm going to get 5 quarterbacks every season. And I'm going to hold on to them. They're never going to see the light of day, but I'm going to keep them away from Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, all these other people, because I don't want them having a great quarterback. Thankfully, they fixed that, and I wasn't able to do that anymore. Now, I'm not saying I did that. If you realize something about me, I'm a Maryland fan, right? In my mind, I have the season where Maryland was playing a linebacker at quarterback, because they literally had every single quarterback, I think like 4 or 5, blow out their ACL in one season, where they were playing Sean Petty, a linebacker, at quarterback. If he had gotten hurt, they had a different linebacker that they were going to play at quarterback. that's fresh in my mind. So I make sure I have 5 or 6 quarterbacks at any given time because I'm worried that I'm gonna lose them. In bowl bound, I had that happen one season with Maryland as well, where I lost 4 quarterbacks in one season, and I literally was playing a walk on. Had he gotten hurt, I don't even know. I would have had to make a special disposition as the commish, moved a running back and a quarterback, and done it that way. And yeah, that would have been bad. And Maryland didn't do well that season, if I remember correctly. But anyways, so interest is something that I think needs to be fixed. I think how long the CPU stays on targets needs to be fixed. If they're not going to get it, or there's a better viable candidate, they should back off. I mean, when you look at it, I don't think you can see it here, but I wonder if you can see it under committed. I don't think you can see it under committed either. But one of the things is, yeah, you can. So you look at these, right? Again, not much different than real life. In real life, commit recruits have tons of offers. It's not unheard of for them to have more than 20, actually. There's some guys who have 40. If I would go to Rivals or I would go to 247 Sports, you'd see some of these 5 stars, some of them have upwards of like 70 scholarship offers, right? But a lot of those are just floaters. There's no way they're going to get the person. They know it. But if you're a top prestige team, you should have a chance. Especially if your depth allows for it. Now, one of the things I think that's happened with Louisiana Monroe this year, they don't have many scholarships. They have depth. In this game, you were punished for depth. Now, in real life, that's not the case. You look at Alabama, you look at Oklahoma. They routinely will bring in people on top of people, and then they'll transfer out if they don't like the solution and so forth. I mean, think about it like Jalen Hurts left Alabama. He went to Oklahoma. There was depth at Oklahoma. He played a few seasons. You get Spencer Rattler who comes in. And I hate to say it, I always forget the kid's name out of D.C. who went to Oklahoma over Maryland this past season. But you see stuff like that, right? But other thing I like to see is a dream school. Some of these recruits should have dream schools, and if they have a dream school, that should be the school that largely is going to get them. I'll use the Dwayne Haskins example. Again, I'm a Maryland fan. For those who don't know, you probably know the name Dwayne Haskins because he played in the pros. But Dwayne Haskins was out of, forget which high school in Maryland. He wasn't a native Marylander, by the way. He's from like New Jersey or something. Dwayne Haskins' dream school was Ohio State. Well, he committed to Maryland. He was all big into Maryland and stuff, and he was fine going to Maryland, right? This was during Randy Edsar's period, so I'd love to forget that time frame, right? Although there was some positives. We had Stephen Diggs and people like that. But anyways, he looked like he was going to go to Maryland. Ohio State offered him. He got a little strange. And this is even before Edsar got fired midway through the season. Mike Locksley, who of course now is the Maryland coach, was named the interim. Everyone thought that he was going to do it. Maryland was courting some big names during this period to replace Edsar. But then they decided they weren't going to go with Locksley. Lo and behold, almost like that, Dwayne Haskins decommits from Maryland. He commits to Ohio State. Now, I'm going to argue with a lot of people, and Haskins has said something different too, and I'm going to call bullshit, right? The reality is Haskins was always going to go to Ohio State if they offered him. They hadn't offered him when he committed to Maryland. He was on the fence when he was at Maryland, and they did offer him. I never expected him to go to Maryland the moment Ohio State offered him because there were pictures of him as a child wearing Ohio State gear. There's no way he's going to Maryland. It had nothing to do with Locksley. Locksley was just a convenient excuse for him to get out of it. And of course, we hired DJ Durkin. The rest is history. And of course, now Locksley is the head coach. Now, always hated that situation because we lost Keandre Jones, who was a phenomenal linebacker who never got to see the light of day at Ohio State. And now you have Dwayne Haskins, of course, who gets drafted by the Washington Redskins. He flops himself out, does some stupid thing during COVID. And then now he's a Pittsburgh Steeler. So it's just funny. He probably back up Ben. But at the end of the day, there should be a dream school. Person should go there. I'd also like to see more transfers. Maryland, I'll use Maryland as an example again. Maryland is so deep, there should be kids transferring out every year out of Maryland. I don't see much transfers out of Maryland most deals. You look at my running back situation, and they are loaded at running back. Those kids will never see the light of day. Santiago Worthy finally got to see the light of day, and he's been killing it. Some of the other guys have seen the light of day, but it's not unheard of at Maryland for you not even to play until your senior season, which, based on the way the WWPF is now done, there's no way you're going to be drafted or even drafted high. So you go into the AAF, which is the other league, which, candidly, some of those guys are going to be happy. But I'm rambling. So I think to recruit successfully, you need to be able to ramp. You need to be very focused on what your needs are, not what you want, but what you actually need. And then you're going to have to reset your expectations. If you were if you were recruiting 5 stars in 2020 and you're a under 80 prestige team, you can still go after 5 stars, but just level set your expectations. You're not going to pull them like you did in the 2020 version. You're also going to have to be okay with 4 stars in really that under 700 recruit crowd. And it's going to be hard for some teams because they've recruited well above what they should have been. But I would argue Louisiana Monroe is not your normal Sunbelt team. They are a high prestige team. They have an effective coach. He made mistakes in his recruiting, but the game has punished him for it. He has 1 recruit through 16 weeks, and that recruit is not worth the salt of anything. And part of it is he didn't make the adjustment as fast as others of us did. I made an adjustment at Maryland around week 6 when I noticed that what I was doing just wasn't working. So I then focused on my talking points. I focused on ramping my outreach. I focused on looking at who was offering, where I was, their interest, dropping off anybody who was under 50. Really, I was dropping anybody who was under 75, and just saying, and God forbid, I'm going to go after 3 stars. And I'm going to start looking for those. And in the past, when I went for 3 stars, I could just jump in the middle of a race and just steal someone like that. It still happens. Still can steal them, especially if they care about prestige or market, or they care about those type of things. But I can't do that as easily as I used to, which is one of the problems that coaches are finding now, is when they miss on someone, they're now trying to go jump onto someone else. And in the past, I could steal 5 stars away from other schools at Maryland because I have a 90 prestige. I have winning games left and right. Can't do that anymore. Got to be more serious. So it would be great to see, like in Ball Bound, you have a little thing that comes if you're between the prestige of 30 and 60. That is your preferred, is your dream email, which is a kid says, hey, look, you're my dream school. I'd love to come play for you. You can recruit him, and he may still decide to go elsewhere. But I do like the new recruiting module. I think it's a great change, and I love how they are balancing it out. I think balance is important because it's easy in these leagues to get out of balance. But I will say that outreach needs to be fixed. There's got to be a quicker way to see the interest. And then CPU needs to come off some of these teams faster and free it up. And then just, I guess maybe one of the things I'd love to see, and again, I don't know that you can program this though, is certain skill positions like quarterbacks they commit early as opposed to late because they want to get the playbooks, they want to get themselves ready for wherever they're going to school. Because if they're going to try to compete as a freshman, they've got to literally be ready to go. And in most cases, a lot of those are early enrollees, right? Where they're going to enroll early. I'd love to see a spring training game, but again, these are things for future releases. The recruiting thing, I think if you fix outreach, you give a way to see the interest, you give a way to ramp the interest in a different way. I think it'll change. And again, if you're getting your ass kicked in recruiting this year, change for next season. Either go with the CPU. If you start at the beginning of the season, that actually is pretty effective. I think a couple of the coaches have done well with recruiting, did that. Or you need to commit yourself to looking at this, okay, saying what are the recruiting points, throwing those at those. Be serious. Don't do the 5, don't do the 2, go 10. Make sure you're scouting the player, make sure you're ramping it, get your phone interviews in the first 2 weeks. Maybe for the big players that you really, really want, maybe you're starting to ramp it where you say, I'm going to attend a high school game because attending the high school game lets you get more intel on that player. Inviting them to a game will actually increase your recruiting points with them and will help you. And then, of course, try to end with that home visit because I think if you end with that home visit, you're really going to nail it. So I think that's the important thing, and be fluid. Be ready to come off someone if that interest is just not generating. If it isn't, don't stay in, get out. But you need to do this in the first 4 or 5 weeks because after the first 4 or 5 weeks, I think loyalty is starting to build with different people, and if they value that, good luck. You're not getting them. So those are just my thoughts. I rambled. I apologize, and you either liked what I said or you don't. But great league here we've got. Want to talk about a couple coaches specifically. So if I don't mention, you don't get mad at me, please. Caesar, Memphis. Wow. First year playing this game in this league. Now, again, I'm going to caveat this. Caesar's a champion coach from Bowl Bound. GDCFL, Ohio State, he won championships though. Guy knows how to play these games. But he never really played this title until this season. And he played last year, I think, too. But this year was like the first full season he had. And he got them to number 14, won his conference. Barring 1 or 2 kind of questionable losses, he's in the playoffs. So Caesar, great job. I think that keep it up. You're doing a great job there at Memphis, and it shows. I think Van with NC State, another good job. NC State wasn't all that good. Van's got him moving in the right direction, and he's increasing them. He got them into a bowl. Granted, they ran into the Gamecocks, who just obliterated them, but they didn't really obliterate them. It was closer than that, but good job there as well. I think the last kind of coach talk about is Gary at Arizona State. Arizona State was okay. They weren't great. Gary gets in there. He had them right on the cusp of winning the division in the South. Had they won the division, I think they would have beat Washington State, and they may have been in the playoffs. Unfortunately, they lost to Arizona. Arizona got beat by Washington State, and then, of course, like what happens in real life, sometimes you get deflated. But they also ran into Purdue, who just has done a great job this season. But I think Arizona State had a really good year. I think Soa turned Florida around. That's a narrative that'll be interesting. I think he's turning James Madison around. That's a little bit hard of a work in progress. Skelton bounced back with Baylor pretty well. They had some ups and downs, but he got him. Matt is just doing what he always does at Clemson. Auburn maybe not as good this year as normal, but Clemson is just right where they are. And then, of course, you got Max, who had that monster class last season. He's going to have another one this year. uh, who's just got Alabama back to where Doc had them. Let's see if he can start winning those championships. I mean, overall, there's a lot of good teams out there that are doing really, really good. Um, and it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see what James does with Texas A&M. He's had a really good second half of the season. He's kept them focused. I gotta say, I think if he had been the coach at Texas A&M when they played Alabama, it may have been a different result. He's done a phenomenal job there. Now, he's still got to get past Max, and Max is a really hard coach to get by because Max is one of the better coaches. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. By the next time we talk, we will have crowned a champion. Who will it be? Will it be Maryland? Will it be Baylor? Will it be Clemson? Will it be Texas A&M or Alabama? Or will CPU finally win a championship, and will it be Louisville or Texas State or California? Kind of want Texas State to win it because I coached them for a long time and they're doing really good. So the players that are went undefeated this year were the players I recruited. So it'll be interesting to see. But next time we'll talk a little bit more. Sorry about the rambling around the recruiting. I think that there's some issues with it. I do think that if you're Louisiana Monroe, you're probably pissed off, and Scoutor is. I think it was a lack of understanding. I do feel like there has to be if conference prestige is causing this issue, that needs to be fixed. Because again, you can't base it on real life, and I don't think that they do, honestly. And from what I've seen in the sandbox things, conference prestige does account a little bit, but not enough. It really comes down to how you recruit. And if you're recruiting the way I said, where you're ramping your outreach, you're really focused on those people that you have a position of need, or will they have the interest in the right category, you're going to largely get those players, but you got to get on them early. You got to stay on them. And then what you cannot do is look at who's not being recruited and expect to win those battles, because as people start to shift, if you don't have a position of need, or it's not the right market, or you're not outreaching them correctly, you're going to lose that battle every single time. So it's Darren, SimNation. If you like this, follow. If you don't. I'll have this on. I'm going to transition over to the bowl bound, so if you'd like to, stay on. There's some good news there and some good things going on there, but overall, my hope is that this is valuable and all of you want to continue to watch. So gonna switch over. Thank you for your time, and we will catch up next week. I encourage you to go to SNCFL.us. I'll have in the links below where the YouTube channel is, and of course we got Slack, and of course we've got the forums. If you want to go there, this is a great league. I encourage you to join. Also take a look at WWPF.us. That's the WWPF. Which is the Pro Football League. They have some teams open, great coaches there. Again, congrats to Peter. Hate you, but he definitely deserves it. I have a rivalry with Peter, actually it's not one-sided. I actually have a rivalry with him, but Peter does a great job. Definitely deserves it. But shout out to Gary, Frankie, and Skeltel, John. You guys have done a great job with WWPF. It's a long-standing league. It's kind of like the WWCF, which is what I'm going to move into now. So thank you for your time tonight on SNCFL. And if you want to stick around and hear about Bowl Bound, feel free to. Thank you.